Let's talk about the main uses of square brackets, which are of course not to be confused with parentheses. So one of the main uses is to add some extra information to a quotation, and we usually do that for clarification purposes. So if you look at this example here, the word it is a little bit vague, and we've added some extra information in square brackets just to clarify it. The truth is, though, that often you can do without the square brackets just by rejigging the quotation a little bit. So what you could do in this case is start just a little bit later in the quotation. If you get rid of it here and the square brackets and the quotation marks, get rid of this final square bracket as well, and then just start your quotation after this explanation. So now it would read, as Robert Ballard recounts, the final resting place of the Titanic, quote, is, and so on. The main lesson then that we learned from this is that wherever possible, try to avoid using square brackets because they tend to interrupt the flow, and often you can do very easily without them. However, at other times it may be necessary to use them after all. So if you look at this example, the original passage uses the word Kiori, which is a Maori term. So the Maori are the native peoples of New Zealand, and most people might not be familiar with this word, and that's why we've indicated what this refers to in square brackets. And because it's really in the middle of the quote and we want the whole quotation, it's pretty much inevitable that we need to use the square brackets here. If you take a closer look at this quotation, by the way, you also see the very nice use here of semicolons in a list with internal punctuation. So if you've reviewed the lesson on semicolons, then you might look at this example and see how nicely they're being used here. The second use of square brackets helps us to integrate quotations. And you can see that in the example here, that in the original, this was likely a lowercase h, but we've changed it to an uppercase h because in this case we want to quote a complete sentence. Often, though, you can do without square brackets simply by changing your introductory phrase or clause, and we've done that here by making sure that our phrasing works very nicely with what follows, so that the syntax works together, and together these two parts form one sentence. In that case, we don't need to change anything here. If this was originally a lowercase t, then we can simply leave it as it is. So a square bracket then, or a set of square brackets, helps us to adjust quotations at times so that we can fit them within the context or the syntax of our own sentences. Let's look very quickly at two more uses of square brackets. The first one is with this little Latin word sic, which means doesn't mean that something is sick. It means thus or so. And it's used in English to point out a mistake in the original passage. In this case, the mistake is that the exclamation mark should have been an L. And the thing is that you can use sick to point that out, just to show that it's not your mistake, but be careful that you don't use sick too much in your writing. If you're seeing mistakes everywhere, that's great. It means you're a very discerning reader. But if you use sick all the time, then people might say, well, this person's very, bit of a show-off, a bit condescending, and so you may want to think twice about whether sick is always useful or necessary. Often what you can do is quote a different passage or paraphrase or work around the original mistake so that you don't necessarily need to draw attention to it. The last major use of square brackets is within parentheses. So let's say you have parentheses within parentheses, then what you can do is turn these middle parentheses into square brackets just to differentiate them. And you can see that we've done that here with the highest mountain in Europe, and we've added some extra information within that. But as you can see from this example, it's a bit of a silly one actually, but you can see that often it's very easy just to rewrite the sentence, change the syntax, and then you can do without square brackets in the first place. So square brackets then, just to summarize, are very useful for adding extra information, for making some changes, for pointing out errors, for showing that parentheses within parentheses are set off properly, but very often you don't really need them. They tend to interrupt the flow of your writing, and if you want to write more naturally and smoothly, then often you can do without them.